A rainy night, a brutal attack, a girl who thought she was nobody, until the most dangerous man in the city walked into her hospital room and told her she was worth killing for. Stay until the end, because this story will change everything you think you know about survival, power, and trust. Drop the name of your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Like and follow so you never miss what comes next. The rain had been falling since 6 in the evening and showed no intention of stopping. Sienna Hartwell pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders as she walked the 4 blocks between the diner and the bus stop, her sneakers already soaked through, the canvas dark and heavy against her feet. She had worked a double shift. 9 hours on her feet, refilling coffee cups and carrying plates of food she couldn't afford to eat herself, smiling at customers who looked through her like she was furniture. Her lower back ached in a way that had become so familiar she barely registered it anymore. Her left wrist was wrapped in a cheap elastic bandage from where she had twisted it 3 weeks ago, carrying a tray loaded with dinner plates. And she had not had the time or money to get it looked at properly, despite the fact that she was technically enrolled in nursing school and knew better. She was 26 years old and tired in a way that went deeper than sleep. The street she cut through was the shorter route. She had taken it 100 times, maybe more. It ran between the back of a dry cleaning business and the chain-link fence of a parking structure, poorly lit, the kind of place a sensible person avoided after dark. Sienna had stopped being sensible about things like that somewhere around year 3 of working nights to pay for school while managing an apartment she could barely afford. Caution was a luxury. 15 minutes off her commute was not. She was halfway through when she heard the footsteps. Not behind her. To her left, from the gap between a rusted dumpster and the fence. She turned her head instinctively, the way you do when something in your peripheral vision registers before your brain catches up. And she had just enough time to see the shape of a man before his hand caught her by the collar of her jacket and yanked her sideways. She went down hard, her hip and elbow hitting the wet asphalt simultaneously. The pain was immediate and blinding. She opened her mouth to scream and a second man appeared from the right, moving fast. And something struck the side of her head with enough force that the world tilted at a grotesque angle, and the scream died somewhere in her throat. She was on the ground. She knew that. Her cheek was against the pavement, and she could feel the cold water soaking through her jeans, and her ears were ringing in a high, thin frequency that made it hard to hear anything else. She was aware of hands going through her jacket pockets, and she tried to push them away, and someone stepped on her wrist. The wrapped one. She heard herself make a sound that didn't sound like her. Then it stopped. Not because they had found what they wanted. Her wallet had $14 in it and a student ID. They didn't even take it. One of them crouched down beside her, close enough that she could smell cigarette smoke and something chemical underneath it, and he said something she couldn't fully make out through the ringing. Something that ended with a name that wasn't hers. A question she didn't understand. When she didn't answer, he grabbed a fistful of her hair and lifted her head off the pavement and asked it again. She still didn't understand, not the name, not the question. She said so, or tried to, and he dropped her head back against the ground with deliberate force, and then they were gone. She lay there for a while. She wasn't sure how long. The rain kept falling. Eventually she got herself upright. One arm, then her knees, then standing, leaning against the chain-link fence while the world refused to hold still. She ran a mental inventory the way they taught her to in clinical prep. Possible concussion. Wrist worse than before. Hip likely bruised, maybe a hairline fracture, but she doubted it. The pain was wrong for bone. Laceration above her left eyebrow that was bleeding steadily down the side of her face, mixing with rain and dripping off her jaw. She walked to the bus stop. She didn't call anyone because there was no one to call. She took the bus to Mercy General because it was the closest hospital and she had done her first clinical rotation there 2 semesters ago and knew the layout. The emergency room waiting area was full. She checked herself in at the front desk, and the intake nurse handed her a clipboard and told her the wait was approximately 3 hours. Sienna found a plastic chair near the far wall, away from the television mounted in the corner that was playing a news channel with the volume too high, and she sat down carefully, mindful of her hip, and pressed a folded paper towel from the bathroom against the cut above her eye, and she waited. The hours moved the way they always do in emergency rooms. Not in any reliable sequence, but in a series of long stalls punctuated by brief moments of noise and movement. Sienna watched a man across the room arguing quietly with his adult son, about something involving a prescription. She watched a young woman nurse a toddler with a fever, rocking back and forth in a steady unconscious rhythm. She watched the orderlies move through, unhurried, and she watched the clock on the wall, and she did not think about what had happened in the alley, because thinking about it would require energy she didn't have. She was called back to a treatment bay around midnight. A nurse took her vitals and cleaned the cut on her eyebrow and asked her what happened. Sienna gave the short version. The nurse wrote it down without visible reaction, in the flat professional tone of someone who had written down variations of this story 3 times already tonight. A doctor appeared 30 minutes later, young, visibly exhausted, and confirmed a mild concussion and severe bruising, but no fracture in the wrist and no fracture in the hip. She was given instructions for concussion monitoring, a prescription for anti-inflammatory medication she could not currently afford, and a pamphlet for victim services that had a coffee stain on the front. She was moved to a recovery bay to wait for discharge paperwork. She was almost asleep, her back against the elevated head of the gurney and her knees drawn up when the curtain opened. She assumed it was the discharge nurse. She opened her eyes. It was not the discharge nurse. The man who stepped through the curtain was tall, not in an exaggerated way, but tall enough that the low clearance of the bay required a slight adjustment of his bearing that he made automatically, without thought. He was wearing a dark jacket, well cut, the kind that cost more than her monthly rent. His hair was black, slightly damp from the rain, pushed back from his face. He was somewhere in his mid-30s, olive-skinned, with a jaw that looked like it had been broken at least once, and healed just slightly off-center. His eyes were dark brown and very still, the kind of still that wasn't peace but control, the stillness of someone who had trained himself not to react. Behind him, visible through the gap in the curtain, were 2 men standing in the hallway. They were not hospital staff. Sienna sat up straighter, her pulse jumping. "Who are you?" He looked at her for a moment before answering, not in a lingering, unsettling way, more like he was running a quick verification, confirming something he already believed to be true. Then he pulled the single plastic chair in the bay away from the wall with 2 fingers and sat down, unhurried, like he had an appointment. "My name is Damien Moretti," he said. His voice was measured, not loud, with a slight texture to it that suggested he was used to rooms going quiet when he spoke. "I know who attacked you tonight." Sienna stared at him. The paper towel she had been holding against the butterfly bandage on her eyebrow was still in her hand. She became aware of it and set it on the gurney beside her. "You should talk to the police then," she said. "I will not be doing that." "Okay." She looked toward the curtain, toward the men standing in the hallway beyond it. Back to him. "How did you get back here? Visiting hours are over." "I'm aware." "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees, hands loosely linked. The posture was almost casual, except for the quality of his attention, which was absolute. "The men who attacked you tonight were not robbing you. You already understand that. You had $14 in your wallet, and they left it behind." Her stomach turned. "How do you know how much money I had?" "Because I know who sent them, and I know what they were looking for." He paused. "They were asking you about a name, someone specific. You told them you didn't know what they meant." Sienna had gone very still. "You were there." "No, I have people who were." He held her gaze steadily. "You told them the truth. They believed you, which is the only reason you are sitting here with a concussion and not in a refrigerated drawer. But the people who sent them will not stop at one attempt." The television down the hall was still audible through the curtain, the sound of a late-night anchor reading something about a traffic incident. The fluorescent light above the gurney buzzed faintly. Sienna was aware of her own breathing, which had gotten shallow. "I don't know who you are," she said. Her voice was steady, which surprised her. "I don't know what you're talking about. I'm a nursing student who works at a diner on Clement Street, and I walked home the wrong way tonight. That's the whole story." "I know your story," Damien said. "Your name is Sienna Hartwell. You're 26. You've lived in this city your entire life. Your mother died when you were 11, and your father disappeared when you were 14. You've had the same apartment on Orchard for 3 years. You work 2 jobs, and you have 1 semester left before you finish your degree." He paused. "I'm not telling you this to frighten you. I'm telling you so you understand that I've had people looking into you since this afternoon, and what they found concerns me significantly. Why are you looking into me at all?" Because my brother has been missing for 11 hours, he said. And the last thing he was working on before he disappeared involved you. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. Sienna looked at him. He looked back. Neither of them moved. I don't know your brother, she said. I believe you. He said it without hesitation. That's the part I can't figure out yet. She should have told him to leave. She knew that. She should have pressed the call button above the gurney and asked for security and let whatever was happening outside this curtain remain outside this curtain. She was concussed and exhausted, and her wrist was wrapped in a new bandage, and her hip was going to be a deep, ugly purple by morning. And the last thing she needed was to be drawn into a conversation with a man who walked through hospital security like it wasn't there and spoke about missing brothers and criminal connections with the flat effect of someone discussing the weather. She didn't press the button. What was your brother looking into? She said. It wasn't quite a question. Damien reached into the interior pocket of his jacket and produced a photograph. Not on his phone, an actual printed photograph, the glossy kind. He leaned forward and held it out to her. She took it. It was a picture of her, taken from a distance, from across what looked like the street outside her apartment building. She was in her diner uniform, carrying a bag of groceries. She didn't remember the specific day, but she recognized the angle of light. Late afternoon, maybe 2 weeks ago. My brother's name is Marco, Damien said. He's 24. He's been watching you for 3 weeks without my knowledge, which means whatever he found was something he decided he needed to investigate privately before bringing it to me. That tells me the information was significant. He sat back. He went missing 14 hours ago. His car was found at the waterfront. There was evidence of a struggle. Sienna set the photograph down on the gurney. Her hands were not entirely steady. What could your brother possibly want with me? She said. The sentence came out flat, genuine confusion underneath it. That, Damien said, is why I'm here. He stood then, which somehow made the bay feel smaller. He straightened his jacket with a practiced motion and looked at her with an expression that was not exactly sympathy, but contained something in the same category. Recognition, maybe, of what he was asking her to absorb. You're going to be discharged in the next hour, he said. When you walk out of this hospital, you are going to get into a car with my people and come with me. Not because I'm ordering you to, because the men who put you in this bed tonight are going to be watching that exit, and the only reason they haven't come in here yet is because my people are standing between them and you. She stared at him. You're serious? I don't make a habit of coming to emergency rooms at midnight for entertainment. I could say no. Yes. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. They both understood what no would mean in a building where his people were the only thing standing between her and another visit from men who asked questions about names she didn't know. Sienna looked at the photograph again. Herself, not knowing she was being watched. Carrying groceries. Being completely ordinary in a way that apparently made her worth targeting. She looked up at him. I want to know everything, she said. Not pieces. Everything. Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise exactly. More like the adjustment a person makes when they recalibrate their estimate of someone upward. Fair enough, he said. The discharge nurse arrived 40 minutes later, and Sienna signed the paperwork with her bad wrist and collected the pamphlet about victim services and followed the instructions she'd been given about concussion monitoring. She changed back into her clothes in the bathroom, the wet denim cold and stiff against her legs. She looked at herself in the mirror above the sink for a long moment, the butterfly bandage above her eyebrow, the bruise already forming along the side of her jaw, the look in her own eyes, which was not fear exactly, but a cousin of it, the look of someone standing at the edge of something they cannot fully see. She walked out into the hallway. Damien was waiting at the end of the corridor. He didn't gesture or wave. He simply turned when she appeared and walked toward the exit, and she followed him because the alternative was walking back out into the rain alone, and she had already seen what was waiting for her there. The car was a black SUV. Not flashy, not armored in any visible way, but solid and dark and unremarkable in the way that expensive, purposeful things sometimes are. One of the men from the hallway held the rear door open. She got in. Damien got in from the other side. The man closed the door and climbed in the front, and they pulled out of the hospital parking structure and into the rain-slicked streets, and Sienna watched the hospital disappear behind them in the side mirror. Where are we going? She said. My property, north side. He was looking at his phone, scrolling through something she couldn't see. It's secure. You'll have your own room, and you'll be free to move around inside the grounds. Am I a prisoner? He glanced up from the phone. No. What am I? He held her gaze for a beat. Right now? The safest person in this city. Everything else we'll figure out. It wasn't a comforting answer, but it had the specific quality of being honest, and she had enough experience with people who weren't honest to recognize the difference. She turned back to the window and watched the city move past in the rain. The Moretti estate was on the north side of the city, as he'd said, in a neighborhood where the houses were set back from the street behind walls and gates and mature trees that blocked the view from the road. She had driven through this part of the city before, but had never had occasion to stop. It existed in a category that had nothing to do with her life, the kind of wealth that expressed itself as quiet removal from everything else. The gate opened before they reached it. The driveway was long. The house itself was large in a way that prioritized solidity over spectacle. Stone and dark wood, deep-set windows, a covered entrance that kept the rain off. There were lights on inside, multiple rooms visible. Another vehicle was already parked near the entrance, and there were men near the door who stood a certain way that told her they were there for a reason that had nothing to do with hospitality. Inside the house was warm. A woman, 50s, dark hair pinned back, the unreadable composure of someone who had worked in this household long enough to have seen things she no longer reacted to, appeared and offered to show Sienna to her room. Sienna looked at Damien. I want that conversation, she said. Tonight, not tomorrow. Give me an hour, he said. She followed the woman upstairs. The room was larger than her apartment. She didn't look at it too carefully because she found the contrast between it and what she went home to every night to be the kind of thing that produced an emotion she didn't have bandwidth for right now. She stood in front of the ensuite mirror and unwrapped the bandage on her wrist with slow, careful fingers and ran it under cold water and wrapped it again with fresh materials from the cabinet beneath the sink. She sat on the edge of the bed and pressed both hands flat against her thighs and breathed in through her nose and out through her mouth for 30 seconds, a trick she had learned in her first semester in clinical psych that actually worked, which was more than she could say for most of the advice she had been given over the years. She thought about the photograph, about the specific deliberate act of someone standing across the street from her apartment and pointing a camera at her from a distance. She thought about a 24-year-old kid named Marco who had apparently decided she was worth watching and had ended up with his car abandoned at the waterfront. She thought about the question the man in the alley had asked her, the name she hadn't recognized, the way he had looked at her when she said she didn't know it, evaluating her, deciding something. She thought about her father. That thought she put away immediately. An hour later, she was in Damien's office on the ground floor, a room that smelled like coffee and old paper, with bookshelves along one wall and a desk that looked like it had been there for decades. Damien was standing by the window with a glass of something amber that he hadn't drunk much of. He looked like a man who had been awake for a long time and had made peace with the prospect of being awake for considerably longer. He set the glass down when she came in and gestured to the leather chair across from his desk. She sat. He didn't. He moved to the desk but leaned against the front of it rather than sitting behind it, which she noted. Whether consciously or not, it leveled the geometry of the conversation. My brother is a problem, he began. Not as a complaint, as a statement of fact, offered with the specific weariness of a person who has said some version of it many times. He's smart, and he's impulsive, and he has a habit of following threads without telling me where he's going. 3 weeks ago, he came to me and said he wanted to look into something, a discrepancy he had noticed in the movement of certain assets in one of our legitimate businesses. I told him to bring me the full picture before taking any action. He didn't. He did not. Damien turned to the desk and opened a folder that was lying there, already prepared. He removed a sheet and held it out. She leaned forward and took it. It was a printed copy of a surveillance photograph, similar in quality to the one he had shown her at the hospital. But this one wasn't of her. It was a man she didn't recognize, middle-aged, heavy-set, sitting at a restaurant table. That's a man named Victor Greaves, Damien said. He's an attorney, runs a firm downtown. On paper, he does estate management, trust administration, probate. In practice, he has been managing assets for several organizations that operate outside the law for approximately 15 years. And he's connected to me how? Damien took the photograph back and set it on the desk. He was quiet for a moment, not because he was uncertain, she thought, but because he was arranging the sequence of information with deliberate care. When you turned 26, he said, a dormant inheritance process was triggered. It was tied to your father's estate, which was placed in administrative probate after he was declared legally absent. Standard process. But the specific trust attached to it was structured in an unusual way. It required activation at a specific age and included provisions that, according to what Marco found, had been deliberately obscured in the legal paperwork. Sienna had gone very still. I told you my father disappeared when I was 14, she said. Yes. The official record says he abandoned the family, left the city. No contact after that. She kept her voice flat and even, a technique she had also learned in clinical training, which turned out to be useful in life more generally. There was no estate. There was nothing. My mother was already gone and the state placed me with a foster family for 2 years until I aged out. The official record, Damien said carefully, may not be the complete record. She looked at him. He met her gaze without looking away. Marco found documentation suggesting your father didn't simply leave, he said. He found evidence suggesting that your father, his name was Thomas Hartwell, correct? Yes? That Thomas Hartwell discovered something significant, connected to a set of offshore accounts belonging to organizations that do not publicize their finances, and that he vanished not because he left willingly, but because he learned things that made him dangerous. The room was very quiet. Sienna pressed her back into the chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment, then back at him. You're telling me my father didn't abandon us, she said. I'm telling you that may be one possibility. I'm not telling you it's the truth. I don't have the full picture yet. What I'm telling you is that Marco found enough of a thread to pull it, and that someone noticed him pulling it and took him. And that someone attacked me the same night. Within hours of each other, yes. She exhaled, long, slow, through her nose. Her wrist was throbbing. Her head was throbbing. The butterfly bandage above her eyebrow was tight against the skin in the particular uncomfortable way of medical tape. So I'm what? She said. Leverage? They think I know something? I think they believe you might lead them to something, Damien said. Or to someone. He paused. Or they wanted to use you the same way they apparently tried to use your inheritance, as bait. For my father. If he's alive, yes. The word if sat in the room and occupied a significant amount of space. Sienna looked at her hands, at the bandage on her wrist, at the bruising visible along the outer edge of her palm. She thought about 14. About the specific day the social worker had come to their apartment. About the way the rooms had looked already emptied of the particular quality of a person's presence before their things were even gone. About the years she had spent constructing a version of events she could live inside. He left. It was his failing. It had nothing to do with her. It was done and done and done. She had gotten very good at constructing those versions. What do you need from me? She said. Damien straightened from his lean against the desk. He picked up the glass of amber liquid from the window ledge and held it without drinking it. For now, he said, I need you here, where my people can keep eyes on you while I find my brother and figure out how deep this runs. He looked at her directly. I'm going to ask you questions about your father, about what you remember, about anything that might seem unimportant but could be a connection point. And I'm going to need you to answer them honestly, even when the answers are uncomfortable. You're asking me to trust you, she said. We met 3 hours ago in a hospital curtain bay. Yes, he said. He didn't dress it up, didn't add reassurances or qualifications, just acknowledged the bare fact of it. She looked at him. She had a decent read on people, not perfect, not infallible, but decent. She had developed it out of necessity, the way you develop most useful things. She read Damien Moretti in the way you read someone when you don't have the luxury of being wrong. He was dangerous, unambiguously, structurally dangerous, not in the volatile way of men who couldn't control themselves, but in the settled way of a man who had built a world around himself in which he held significant power over outcomes. He was not telling her everything. She didn't expect him to. He was also not lying to her, at least not about the things that mattered most, and she had enough experience distinguishing between those two things to understand the difference. She was also aware that she was in his house, having arrived in his car, surrounded by his people, with a concussion and a re-injured wrist, and no one in the world who would notice if she didn't come home tonight. Trust was a complicated word for her particular situation. "Tell me about your brother," she said. "Not the version where he's a problem, the real version." Something passed through Damien's expression. Brief, but there. "He's 24 years old," he said. "He thinks faster than he acts, which sounds like a compliment, but isn't. He should have come to me. He didn't because he was trying to protect something. I don't know yet whether that was information, a person, or himself." He paused. "He's the only family I have left." It was a simple sentence. He said it without inflection, and maybe that was the point. "Okay," Sienna said. "Okay, what?" "Okay, I'll answer your questions." She held his gaze. "But I want answers too. Whatever you find, about my father, about the people who attacked me, about any of it, you tell me. You don't filter it because you think I can't handle it." He was quiet for a moment. "That's a fair condition," he said. "I'm not interested in whether it's fair. I'm interested in whether you'll keep it." He looked at her for a long moment. The quality of his attention was extraordinary, she had noticed. The kind of focused, complete regard that most people reserved for screens and never offered to actual human beings. "I'll keep it," he said. She nodded once. She didn't say she believed him. She didn't say she didn't. She tucked it into the same category as everything else she was holding right now. Uncertain, weighted, requiring further evidence. "I need to sleep," she said. "Concussion protocol. I'll answer your questions in the morning. There's a doctor coming at 7 to check on you. Don't argue about it." "I'm a nursing student. I'm not going to argue about medical care." She stood, careful with her hip, and moved toward the door. She paused with her hand on the frame. "The name they asked me," she said without turning around. "In the alley. I've been trying to remember it clearly. I was disoriented." She turned enough to see his profile. "Does the name Calloway mean anything to you?" She watched him go still. Not the trained stillness she had noticed before. Something different, something involuntary. "Where did you hear that name?" he said. "That's what they asked me about," she said. "In the alley. They asked me if I knew where to find Calloway." She held his gaze. "I'm going to guess that means something." Damien set the glass down on the desk. Slowly, his jaw was tight. "Go get some sleep," he said. His voice was even, controlled. But underneath the control there was something moving, something with velocity. "We have a great deal more to talk about in the morning." She studied him for one more beat. "You know that name?" she said. He didn't answer. But the silence was its own answer, dense and absolute, and she carried it upstairs with her and lay in the too-large bed with her eyes on the ceiling, listening to the rain that was still falling against the windows, thinking about her father, thinking about a 24-year-old kid named Marco, who had been watching her from across the street, thinking about a name that had turned a controlled and dangerous man into something that looked, very briefly, like fear. She had thought the worst part of tonight was the alley. She was beginning to understand she had not even reached the worst part yet. She didn't sleep well. That wasn't a surprise. The concussion made real sleep impossible anyway. She surfaced every hour or so, groggy and disoriented, staring at an unfamiliar ceiling in a room that smelled like cedar and expensive laundering, and it took a few seconds each time to remember where she was and why. And that process of remembering was not pleasant. Her hip had stiffened overnight, and her wrist was a dull, persistent complaint that sat somewhere below the threshold of real pain, but above the threshold of being ignorable. Around 5 in the morning, she gave up on sleep entirely and sat on the edge of the bed and looked out the window. The rain had stopped. The grounds outside were gray and wet, the grass dark, the trees along the eastern wall dripping. The sky was the specific colorless white of early morning in a city that hadn't decided yet whether to produce actual daylight or just a slightly brighter version of night. There were 2 men on the grounds. She could see them from the window. Not patrolling exactly, more positioned, standing in places that gave them sight lines. They were not looking toward the house. They were looking out, toward the walls and the gate and the street beyond. She watched them for a while. Then she got up and washed her face with cold water, and changed into the clothes the woman from last night had left folded on the chair near the door. A plain dark sweater and jeans that were close enough to her size to work, which told her either the woman was good at estimating or someone had known her measurements in advance, and she deliberately did not think about which of those options was more likely. She rewrapped her wrist. She pressed gently along the edges of the butterfly bandage above her eyebrow and decided it was holding. She went downstairs. The kitchen was at the back of the house, large and functional in a way that suggested it was used seriously and not for show. A man she hadn't seen before was standing at the counter with a coffee mug, scrolling through something on his phone. He looked up when she came in. He was maybe 30, dark-haired, with the kind of compact physicality that suggests someone who moved for a living. He looked at her the way people look at things that aren't quite in the category they were expecting. "Coffee's fresh," he said. "Not warm, not unfriendly, just information." "Thanks." She found a mug on the rack and poured herself a cup and stood at the counter with it and looked out the window over the sink, which faced the side of the grounds where a third man was now visible near the gate. "How many people work here?" she said. "Enough," the man said. She looked at him sideways. "That's a very specific number." He almost smiled. Not quite. He pocketed his phone and picked up his mug and walked out without elaborating, which she supposed was its own kind of answer. She drank the coffee, standing up because her hip hurt less that way. And she thought about Calloway, and she thought about the look on Damien's face when she'd said the name. And she thought about her father, and then she heard footsteps in the hallway, and Damien came into the kitchen. He looked like he hadn't slept either. He had changed his clothes, or possibly he hadn't gone to bed at all, and had simply changed at some point in the night. She couldn't tell. He moved to the coffee maker with the automatic efficiency of someone who had done it 10,000 times, and poured a cup and stood on the other side of the counter from her and drank it without speaking for a moment. She let him have that moment. She didn't particularly want to be charitable about it, but she recognized it. The space a person needs at the beginning of a day that is already going badly before it started. Then he set the mug down. "I owe you an explanation about Calloway," he said. "Yes," she agreed. "You do." He turned the mug in his hands once, a small rotational motion, and looked at the counter. "The name Calloway is a designation," he said. "Not a last name. It's what certain people in certain networks use to refer to a specific individual whose real identity has been protected for years. An intermediary. Someone who brokers information between criminal organizations and parties who want access to things those organizations hold, account numbers, access codes, asset locations." He paused. "Someone who, according to intelligence my people have been trying to verify for 2 years, has been operating in this city for a very long time." Sienna set her mug down carefully. "And you think my father is Calloway?" "I don't know what I think yet." He looked up at her. "What I know is that the people who attacked you used that name as a test. They wanted to see if you'd react, if you knew it. They already suspected a connection. They just needed to read your face to confirm it. I didn't react, because I didn't know it. I know, and that's the only reason you walked away." He turned to the window. "The problem is that my brother apparently found the same connection before he disappeared. He spent 3 weeks mapping a link between the Calloway identity and Thomas Hartwell. He documented it, and whoever took him did it quickly and cleanly, which means they were watching him too." Sienna was quiet for a moment. "You went through his work," she said. "After I went upstairs last night, you spent the night going through whatever Marco left behind." He didn't confirm it. He didn't need to. "Did he find anything else?" she said. "Beyond the theory." Damien turned from the window. His jaw had that tightness again. "He found a storage unit, registered under a corporate name that traces back through 3 shell entities to a trust that was set up shortly before your father disappeared. Marco had the address, but he hadn't gone yet. I sent 2 of my men this morning. And they found documents, photographs, financial records. Marco had accessed it at some point. There were his fingerprints on a folder and he'd taken something. We don't know what, because whatever he removed from that unit, he didn't bring home. Sienna absorbed this. So whoever took your brother may also have taken whatever he found. Possibly, or he hid it separately before they got to him." He looked at her with the same quality of absolute attention she had noticed the night before. "Or he left it somewhere specific, somewhere he expected someone to eventually look." She understood what he wasn't quite saying. "You think he might have left something for me to find?" "I think it's possible he knew enough about the situation to understand you were going to become involved eventually, and that you might be the safest person to give something to, precisely because you appeared to know nothing." He paused. "Has anyone attempted to contact you in the past few weeks? Anything unusual? Mail? Phone calls? A message through someone you know? She started to say no, then stopped. He caught it. His eyes sharpened. What? He said. 3 weeks ago, she said slowly. I found an envelope in my mailbox. No return address. I thought it was a piece of junk mail that had lost its outer wrap because there was no name on it either. Just my address, handwritten. Inside there was a key. Small, looks like a luggage lock key or a gym locker key. She met his gaze. I threw the envelope away. I kept the key because I thought maybe I'd accidentally picked up someone else's mail and would figure out whose it was later. It's been sitting on my kitchen counter for 3 weeks. The silence that followed had a particular texture. Is your apartment locked? Damien said. I live in a building where the front door lock has been broken for 6 months. So, technically, no. He turned and walked out of the kitchen. She heard him in the hallway, a brief exchange with someone in a low voice. She picked her coffee mug back up and finished the last of it, cold now, and set the mug in the sink and waited. He came back with the compact man from earlier. This is Reed, Damien said. He's going to your apartment to retrieve the key. My apartment has my things in it, Sienna said. My laptop, my clinical notes, He'll bring everything relevant. Give him a list. I'd rather go myself. No, Damien said. Flat, final, not unkind. There will be people watching your building. You walking in there is a problem I don't need this morning. She looked at Reed. He was watching her with the same neutral readiness as before, waiting. She told him where to find the key. She told him about her laptop bag, the clinical binders on the second shelf of the bookcase, the small locked box on the top of her closet that held her mother's jewelry and her own documents. He listened without writing anything down. Anything else? He said. There's a blue mug on the dish rack, she said. It was my mother's. Please don't leave it. Something moved in his face, very briefly. Okay, he said, and left. She stood in the kitchen in the borrowed sweater and listened to the front door close and stood there for a moment with the particular feeling of someone watching their last pieces of normal life being carried away in someone else's hands. The doctor arrived at 7, as promised. She submitted to the examination without arguing, answered the concussion. Assessment questions correctly, let him look at her wrist and her hip and the laceration above her eyebrow. He recommended continued rest and told her the wrist needed a proper brace rather than elastic bandaging and produced one from his bag. She let him put it on. He was professional and efficient and left without asking any questions that weren't medically relevant, which told her he had worked for Damien long enough to have calibrated his curiosity accordingly. Damien's head of security was a woman named Petra, late 40s, short silver hair, a stillness that made Damien's trained stillness look almost restless by comparison. She appeared while Sienna was eating a breakfast she hadn't asked for but was grateful for, and she sat across from her at the kitchen table with a tablet and no preamble. I need to ask you some things, Petra said. Damien already told me. Damien asks different questions than I ask. She set the tablet face down on the table. In the weeks before the attack, did you notice anyone following you, any vehicle that appeared more than once? No. Any new contacts at work, at school, someone who seemed to be cultivating a relationship? Sienna thought about it genuinely. There was a guy who started coming into the diner about a month ago. I remember because he always took the same corner booth, and he always ordered coffee and nothing else and sat there for a long time. But that's not unusual for a diner. Petra made a note on the tablet, which she had flipped face up. Description: mid-20s, brown hair, average height and build, nice jacket, the wrong kind of nice for the neighborhood, like someone wearing their good clothes somewhere they don't usually go. She paused. I remember noticing that. Did he speak to you beyond ordering? Once. He asked if I'd worked there long. I said 2 years. He said something like it seemed like a friendly place and left a good tip. She paused again. He came back twice more after that. Last time was maybe 2 weeks ago. I haven't seen him since. Petra looked at her for a moment. That was Marco. The air went out of the room. Sienna put the fork down. He was in the diner, she said. Yes, he talked to me. She played it back in her memory, the corner booth, the too nice jacket, the easy, uncomplicated question that she had taken for nothing more than small talk, the way he had looked at her. And she remembered this now, the specific quality of it, attentive in a way that was different from the standard baseline diner customer attention. He was watching me in person, and I didn't know. He was 24 and not a professional at this, Petra said, not harshly. He was doing the best he could with a situation he probably shouldn't have been in alone. Sienna picked the fork back up, not because she was still hungry, but because she needed something to do with her hands. She pushed food around the plate for a moment. "He's alive," she said. It wasn't a question. "We believe so. They took him for information. That means they haven't gotten what they need yet, which means he's still useful to them." Petra said it with the efficiency of someone who had done this kind of calculation many times, which didn't make it comfortable to hear but did make it credible. "What concerns me is the timeline. The pressure will escalate." Reed came back at 9:15. He had the laptop bag, the binders, the locked box. He had the blue mug wrapped in a dish towel. He set everything on the table in the front room and handed Damien a small silver key on a plain ring. Damien turned it in his fingers. He held it up to the light. It was a standard small-gauge key, the kind used for lockers at transit hubs, fitness centers, storage facilities with smaller unit options. There was a number stamped on the head, a 4-digit number. "Union Station has a public locker bay," Reed said. "Row 4. This gauge fits." Damien looked at Sienna. "Marco sent this to you," he said. "Before he was taken. He knew enough about the situation to know that if something happened to him, you were the safest person to send it to." She looked at the key in his hand, the key she had tossed on her kitchen counter and more or less forgotten about for 3 weeks, the way you forget about things that appear to be nothing. "What's in the locker?" she said. "That's what we're going to find out." The drive to Union Station took 25 minutes. 2 vehicles, the black SUV she had been in the night before, and a second car ahead of them. Sienna sat in the back beside Damien and watched the city through the window and said nothing for most of the drive. The city looked different in daylight. It looked like itself. Ordinary, indifferent, full of people going to work and buying coffee and not being involved in any of this. The locker bay was in the lower level of the station. Broad, vaulted, smelling of old concrete and the particular transit hub combination of cleaning product and accumulated foot traffic. It was busy enough at 9:30 in the morning that 4 additional people moving through it drew no particular attention. Row 4. The key turned on the first try. Inside the locker was a manila envelope, sealed, thick with contents, with nothing written on the outside. Damien took it. He didn't open it in the station. They walked back to the vehicles and got in, and the moment the door closed, he slit the envelope open with a folding knife from his jacket pocket. Photographs? Documents. A small USB drive held to a folded sheet of paper with a rubber band. Damien went through the photographs first. His face was absolutely composed. Then Sienna saw his expression shift. Just once. Just briefly. But it shifted in a way that went past the trained control and hit something underneath it. Something genuine and uncomfortable and old. He turned one of the photographs over and held it up. She looked at it. It was a man she had never seen before, photographed at what looked like a private event. Well-dressed, laughing at something off camera, a glass in his hand. 50s. Silver-templed. The photograph had a date stamp in the bottom corner. 7 weeks ago. On the back of the photograph, in a handwriting she didn't recognize, was a single word. Calloway. And below it, in smaller script, an additional notation that she read and then read again and felt the floor of something shift underneath her. The notation said, "Confirmed biological connection. Hartwell family." She looked up at Damien. He was watching her. He had been watching her reaction, she realized. Not to see how she would fall apart, but to see what she already knew. Running the same read on her that she had run on him the night before. "The man in this photograph," she said. Her voice was steady. She was surprised by that. "You know him." Damien lowered the photograph. "His name," he said, and there was something in his voice that had not been there before, but not quite anger, not quite grief, but something in the compound of both, "is Raymond Voss. He is the head of one of the 3 largest criminal organizations operating in this city." A pause. "He has been, for the past 4 years, an ally of mine. We have agreements, financial arrangements. He attends certain events at this house." The implication landed before he said it. "And your brother," Sienna said carefully, "found evidence that this man is Calloway, that this man is connected to my father's disappearance, that this man has been operating in the middle of everything, including inside your own network." Damien didn't answer immediately. Yes, he said. Outside the tinted window, the city moved past, unhurried, ordinary. A woman pushed a stroller. A man argued with a parking meter. Two kids in school uniforms crossed at the light. He knows I'm here, Sienna said. Doesn't he, Voss? He knows you brought me in. He will by now, Damien said. His voice had gone very quiet. Which means every assumption I made about the security of this situation changed the moment you told me that name last night. She looked at him. So your safe house, she said, may not be safe. He held her gaze. I need to make some calls, he said. He looked at Reed in the front seat. Change the route. Reed didn't ask why. He was already turning. Sienna pressed her back against the seat and looked at the envelope in Damien's hands and thought about a man named Raymond Voss laughing at a party 7 weeks ago. A man with agreements and financial arrangements and access to a house where she had slept last night, and she understood with absolute clarity that they had passed the point at which any version of her old life was waiting for her on the other side of this. There was no other side yet. There was only forward into whatever was in the rest of that envelope and whatever Damien's face would do when he found it. Reed changed the route twice. The first change took them east, away from the north side entirely, through a stretch of industrial blocks where the buildings were low and the streets were wide and there was nothing decorative about anything. The second change looped them back through a residential neighborhood Sienna didn't recognize, slower, Reed checking the mirrors with the systematic regularity of someone running a counter-surveillance drill he had done enough times that it required no conscious thought. Damien was on the phone for most of it, not speaking, listening. He said 4 words in the span of 15 minutes. His face gave away nothing that his voice wasn't already controlling. Sienna held the envelope on her lap. She had not looked further into it. She had a strong instinct that whatever else was in there needed to be looked at somewhere with walls and a locked door, not in a moving vehicle. She watched the city instead and thought about Raymond Voss laughing at a party. She thought about the word agreements and what it covered and what it didn't. Damien ended the call. He sat with the phone in his hand for a moment. We're not going back to the house, he said. I gathered. There's a property I maintain separately. It's not registered to anything connected to me directly. Petra is meeting us there with a smaller team. He paused. The house on the north side is compromised until I know the extent of Voss's access. How much access does he have? The muscle along his jaw moved once. More than I'd like. She looked at him. How long has he been an ally? 4 years. And before that? Before that, he was a competitor. He turned the phone over in his hand. The arrangement we reached 4 years ago resolved a territorial dispute that had cost both sides significantly. It was pragmatic. It held. He paused. It apparently held because he needed it to hold while he maneuvered into position. Sienna thought about that. 4 years of manufactured peace. 4 years of Voss sitting in Damien's house, attending his events, building familiarity and access, while somewhere underneath it all, he was moving different pieces across a different board entirely. He had your brother watch too, she said. Yes. And when Marco started pulling at the right thread, he moved. Damien's voice was flat and extremely controlled. He moved on Marco first and then on you within the same 12-hour window, which tells me he'd been holding both contingencies ready and was waiting for a trigger. What was the trigger? Damien was quiet for a moment. The inheritance process, he said. When you turned 26 and the dormant trust activated, it sent a notification through the probate system to all named interested parties. He looked at her directly. Raymond Voss is listed as an interested party in your father's estate, under a corporate name. I didn't see it until this morning. She heard that. She heard all of it. She let it sit for a moment without reacting, because reacting in the back of a moving car would accomplish nothing except make her feel worse than she already did. My turning 26, she said. That's what started all of this. It appears so. Your brother noticed the movement in the accounts because Voss got careless when the trust activated. He started pulling resources that created a paper trail. That's what the documents suggest, yes. She looked out the window. They were on the bridge now, the river below flat and gray in the morning light. Open the rest of the envelope, she said. He did. The documents were dense. Financial records, account transfers, corporate registrations across 4 jurisdictions. He went through them methodically, his face unchanging, while Sienna watched and read what she could from the angle she had. Most of it was technical in a way that required context she didn't have, but the USB drive was attached to the folded sheet of paper, and when Damien unfolded the paper, she could read it clearly because he held it between them without appearing to consider whether she should see it. It was a letter, handwritten, 7 lines. D. If you're reading this, I'm already in trouble. Voss is Calloway. He's been running the offshore network since before the Hartwell case. Thomas Hartwell didn't just find the accounts. He built the access architecture. He went into hiding when Voss tried to have him killed. He's still alive. He's been protected by a handler whose identity is on the drive. The handler is someone you trust. I'm sorry. M. Damien read it. Then he read it again. Sienna read it with him the second time, even though she had already absorbed every word. He's still alive. 3 words she had spent 12 years constructing alternatives to, and they sat there in Marco's handwriting on a folded piece of paper in the back of a moving car and rearranged everything. She became aware that her hands were pressing flat against her thighs, the same thing she had done the night before in the too large bedroom. She was aware of her own breathing, which had changed without her permission. She breathed in through her nose and held it for 3 counts, and let it out and did it again. Damien said nothing. He folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. He looked forward, at the road through the windshield, at nothing specifically. The handler is someone you trust, she said. Her voice was even. She was aware of how much effort that required. Yes, that's what he was trying to tell you. Yes. Do you know who it is? He didn't answer immediately. His profile was still that trained, absolute stillness, but there was something behind it now that was costing him more than usual to maintain. I have a name in my head, he said. I want to look at the drive before I say it. She understood that. She would have wanted the same thing. The distance between a suspicion and a confirmed betrayal is the distance between a wound that might heal and one that won't. The second property was a warehouse conversion in the Port District, the kind of building that looked like nothing from the outside and had been extensively modified within. Petra was already there with 3 people Sienna hadn't seen before. The space inside was functional and spare. A main room with tables and monitors, 2 smaller rooms off the back, a kitchen along one wall. It smelled like concrete and machine oil, and the particular neutrality of a place that was used occasionally and maintained carefully. Petra took one look at Damien's face and said nothing. She handed him a laptop. He inserted the USB drive. Sienna sat at the edge of the table and waited. The drive contained a single encrypted folder. Damien typed a key. She didn't look at what. And it opened. More documents. More photographs. And a video file, time-stamped 6 days ago. He played it. Marco's face on the screen. He was sitting somewhere dim, a concrete wall behind him, speaking directly into the camera with the specific compressed intensity of someone who believes they are running out of time to say necessary things. He looked like Damien around the eyes. She hadn't expected that. If this is plain, Damien found the locker, Marco said. His voice was slightly rushed but controlled, a young man performing calm. Everything I found is in the folder. Voss is Calloway. The financial architecture proves it across 18 months of transfers. Thomas Hartwell built the access system for him originally, didn't know what it was being used for, found out, tried to go to law enforcement, and Voss moved to eliminate him. Hartwell faked a partial paper trail to make it look like abandonment, went underground, and has been protected since then by... He stopped, looked off camera briefly, looked back. By Greaves. Victor Greaves, the attorney. Greaves has been his handler for 11 years. I have the communication records. Sienna watched the screen. She held herself completely still. The problem, Marco continued, is that Greaves also works for Damien. He's managed 3 of our legitimate business trusts for the past 2 years, which means Voss has had a line into our operations for 2 years minimum, and Greaves has been feeding him. A pause. He pressed his lips together for a moment. I didn't know how to tell you that, so I'm telling you on a drive instead, which is cowardly, and I know it. The other thing, he stopped again, longer this time. The other thing I need to say is about Sienna Hartwell. He said her name with care, like he had practiced it. She doesn't know any of this. She's clean. Her father has been trying to get a message to her for years, but Greaves has been intercepting everything. He's been using the inheritance process as the trigger because he needs someone with Hartwell's blood to authenticate the account access he built. The access codes are biometrically tied to the family line. A breath. Which means Sienna isn't just bait. She's the key. Literally. Without her, Voss can't touch the accounts. And her father set it up that way deliberately, to make sure the only way to reach the money was through someone he trusted completely. The video ended. The room was quiet for a long time. Petra was the first to move. She crossed to the table where she had set down her own tablet and began working on it without announcing what she was doing. Damien stood with his hands flat on the table, looking at the black screen. His knuckles were white. Sienna looked at the side of his face, at the specific quality of what was happening there, the thing underneath the control that he was fighting to maintain. "Greaves," she said. "Yes." "How long has he worked for you?" 2 years. He turned to look at her. His face was very tight. "I brought him in to manage 3 trust structures after my previous attorney retired. He came recommended by—" He stopped. "By Voss," she said. His jaw worked once. "By Voss." She absorbed that. A man who had handed Damien the specific tool by which his own operation would be observed and compromised, and had done it 2 years ago, which meant the architecture of this betrayal had been under construction for longer than most people maintained attention to anything. "Where is Greaves now?" she said. "His office opens at 9. Petra said it without looking up from the tablet. "He arrived at 8:52. He is currently in the building." Damien pushed off this table. He turned to Reed, who was standing near the door. "Get the car," he said. Sienna stood. "I'm coming." "No." "You said you'd keep me informed. That was the condition." "Informed doesn't mean present for—" "I'm the key." She held his gaze. She said it without heat, without performance. Just the plain fact of it. "You just heard your brother say it. Without me, the accounts are inaccessible, which means I am the most important person in this room right now, and I am not going to sit in a warehouse in the Port District while you go have a conversation that directly determines what happens to my father." She paused. "Take me, or I find my own way there." He stared at her, not with anger, with the expression of a man reassessing something he thought he had already measured. He turned to Reed. "Get the car," he said again. Greaves and Associates occupied the 9th floor of a building downtown that had the specific aesthetic of legitimate prosperity. Marble lobby, attentive security desk, elevator music that suggested a decorator had been consulted. The receptionist looked up when they came through the door at 10:12 in the morning and began the standard professional greeting, and Damien walked past her desk without slowing, and she did not attempt to stop him. And Sienna understood this was because something in the way he moved communicated that stopping him would be a category error. The office door was glass-fronted. She could see through it. Victor Greaves was on the phone, seated behind a desk that expressed the same studied prosperity as the rest of the floor. He was the man from the photograph, heavy-set, silver-templed, the particular grooming of someone who spent real money on appearing effortlessly maintained. He saw Damien through the glass, and his face did something brief and complicated, and then reset into a professional welcome expression. He should not have reset so fast. That was his mistake. A man with nothing to hide would have stayed at simply surprised. Damien opened the door. Greaves was already standing, phone down, hand extended. "Damien, I wasn't expecting—" "Sit down," Damien said. Greaves looked at Sienna. He looked at Reed behind her in the doorway. He looked at Damien's face and made whatever calculation was available to him in that moment and sat down. Damien did not sit. He put both hands on the desk and leaned forward and looked at Greaves from a distance of approximately 18 inches. "Thomas Hartwell," he said. Greaves's face produced nothing, which was itself something because an innocent man would have produced confusion. 11 years, Damien said. "You've been running him for 11 years. A pause. Then Greaves exhaled a slow, deliberate breath and sat back in his chair, and the performance of professional welcome evaporated entirely, leaving behind something that was quieter and considerably colder. "Where did you get that?" he said. "My brother." Greaves looked at the desk for a moment. Something moved across his face that might have been regret, or might have been the performance of it. "Marco shouldn't have—" "Where is he?" Damien's voice was very quiet. I don't know. Damien straightened up and walked around the desk in 3 steps and took Greaves by the collar of his jacket and lifted him half out of the chair and held him there with a quality of force that was entirely absent of performance. I'm going to ask you one more time, he said. Sienna stood at the front of the desk and watched and did not look away. She was aware of her own pulse. She was aware that she should find this disturbing. A man being held by his collar in a glass-fronted office on the 9th floor of a downtown building. And she was aware that she did not find it disturbing, which told her something about how far she had traveled in the last 18 hours. Voss has him, Greaves said. His voice had gone thin. A location in the valley. I don't have the specific address, but I can get it. He was sweating now, the silver temples damp. I didn't authorize what happened to the boy. That was Voss moving outside the arrangement. There is no arrangement anymore, Damien said. Damien, you have been reporting my operations to Raymond Voss for 2 years. He said it with the flat finality of a sentence that requires no response. You have been managing Thomas Hartwell's protection as Voss's instrument. You gave Voss access to my financial structures. He released Greaves's collar with a motion that was almost contemptuous in its restraint. The only question I have left is whether you placed the man in those operations by choice or because Voss had something over you. Greaves straightened his jacket with hands that were not quite steady. He looked at Sienna then, for the first time since she'd entered the room, and the look was complicated, and she didn't fully trust her read of it. Your father is a good man, he said to her. I want you to understand that. Whatever else I am, I kept him alive. Sienna looked at him. The bruise along her jaw was a constant dull pressure. Her wrist hurt inside the new brace. Her eyebrow hurt where the butterfly strip pulled. You intercepted his messages to me, she said. For years. He tried to reach me, and you intercepted it. Greaves said nothing. He thought I didn't answer, she said. He's been out there for 12 years thinking I didn't... She stopped. She pressed her back teeth together for a moment. You kept him alive as leverage. Don't tell me it was because you're a good man. Greaves had the decency to look at the desk. Damien took his phone out and placed it on the desk in front of Greaves. The address? He said. Now. Greaves looked at the phone. He looked at Damien. He made his calculation. He picked up the phone. He was halfway through dialing when the window behind his desk exploded inward. The sound was enormous. Not glass breaking, but glass disintegrating. A pressure wave impact that came with a concussive burst of displaced air. Sienna was already moving before she consciously understood why, dropping below the level of the desk by pure physical reflex, her elbow hitting the floor, her bad wrist taking a strike that sent white light across her vision. The next sound was Reed, in the doorway, shouting something. Then a second impact. Closer. She could see Damien from the floor. He had gone down too, behind the desk, and he was moving toward her with his hand outstretched, and his expression was the most unguarded she had seen it, stripped entirely of the trained composure, just a man moving fast toward a person he needed to reach. He grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the interior wall. Greaves, she said. Damien looked back. Greaves was in his chair. He was still in his chair, which was wrong, because the pressure of the first impact should have knocked him to the floor. He was sitting upright, and his expression was the particular blank surprise of a man who has absorbed information that is too large to process in real time. There was a spreading dark stain below his left shoulder. He's been shot, Sienna said. The nursing student part of her brain engaged immediately and completely, overriding everything else. We have to move, Damien said, his hand on her arm. He'll bleed out in 4 minutes without pressure on... Sienna. His voice was sharp and quiet, and his eyes held hers with absolute directness. Voss just sent a shooter to eliminate the one man who could give us Marco's location, which means Voss knows we're here, which means there are more people in this building right now, and we have approximately 90 seconds before they reach this floor. She looked at Greaves. Greaves looked back at her. His breathing was already labored. The valley, she said to him. Where in the valley? He coughed. His hand moved to the wound instinctively, pressing against it. Morrow Creek Road, he said. His voice was wet and effortful. There's a property at the end of the road. Voss uses it for... He coughed again. Storage. You'll need to... The office door opened. Reed came through it fast, moving backward, which meant there was something behind him that required that orientation. He said one word. Stairwell. Damien had her on her feet and moving before the word was finished. She had one last look at Greaves in the chair, his hand pressed to his shoulder, his expression carrying the specific quality of a man who had spent years managing a complex architecture of loyalty and compromise and had just discovered the exact point at which it had always been destined to collapse on him. Then she was in the hallway, and they were running. The stairwell door hit the wall when Reed pushed it open. Damien was right behind her, his hand at her back. Not pulling, just present, a pressure that kept her calibrated to his direction in the way you calibrate to someone when you can't afford to move independently. Her hip screamed on the first landing, and she absorbed it without slowing because slowing was not available. Down 2 floors, 3. She could hear sound above them. Not close, but with the particular acoustic quality of a stairwell that carried everything. 2nd floor. Reed held up a fist. They stopped. She could hear her own breathing. She focused on slowing it. Her wrist was on fire. Reed cracked the door and looked through for 3 seconds and pulled it back. He held up 2 fingers and pointed left. 2 people. Left side. Damien leaned down to her ear. His voice was below a whisper. When the door opens, you go right and keep moving. Don't stop for anything. And you. I'll be right behind you. He held her gaze for a fraction of a second. Trust me. She wanted to say something about the specific circumstances under which that phrase became complicated. She didn't. The door opened. She went right. She made it to the lobby stairwell exit and through the fire door and into the marble lobby where the receptionist was on the phone, and 2 men near the security desk turned toward her and she kept moving, straight through the revolving door and into the daylight. And Reed's car was at the curb, and the door was already open, and she got in and turned to look back through the glass, and Damien came through the revolving door at a pace that was almost controlled. He got in. Reed pulled out. She looked at him. He had a cut on his hand, the left one. Something from the glass, most likely. He was wrapping it in a handkerchief with the matter-of-fact efficiency of someone who had dressed field wounds before and found the process unremarkable. Greaves, she said. Alive when we left. My people are calling it in anonymously. He tied off the handkerchief. He may make it. The shot was positioned to incapacitate, not kill immediately, which is consistent with Voss wanting him silenced but maintaining the appearance of an outside attack. She processed that. Voss knew we were at that office, she said. Yes. He had someone watching Greaves, which means he anticipated we'd find the drive. Or someone in my operation told him we were moving. He said it in the same flat tone he used for everything difficult. Flat not because it didn't cost him, but because he had made the decision, somewhere, to pay costs without displaying them. She looked at his wrapped hand. Morrow Creek Road, she said. I heard. Marco is there. I know. So we're going. He looked at her. The cut on his hand was seeping slightly through the handkerchief. The city moved past outside. He had brought her into this, which he had done knowing it would cost her something, and it had cost her significantly more than either of them had anticipated, and he was sitting beside her with a cut hand and an alliance that was rotten in at least 2 places, and a brother held at a location they had obtained from a dying man in an office with a blown-out window. Yes, he said. We're going. She nodded once. Her father was alive. He had built a lock that only her blood could open, which meant he had planned for the possibility of finding her, which meant he had never stopped thinking about her, which meant everything she had built in 12 years around the idea of being left behind was... She pressed her hands flat against her thighs. Forward, only forward. Morrow Creek Road was 40 minutes outside the city. Reed drove and said nothing, and Damien sat in the front making calls in a low, clipped voice, while Sienna sat in the back and looked out the window at the city giving way to the outskirts, giving way to the long, flat stretches of highway that connected the urban density to whatever was beyond it. Her wrist was bad. She had stopped cataloging the specific quality of bad because it wasn't actionable right now. Her hip had settled into a grinding baseline ache that she had located in her awareness and partitioned off. The butterfly strip above her eyebrow had started to lift at one corner from the activity in the building, and she pressed it back down with 2 fingers and held it for a moment and let go. She thought about what Greaves had said. Your father is a good man. She thought about 12 years, about the specific texture of 12 years built on a particular story. He left. It was his choice. It had nothing to do with love or its absence. It was simply a man who decided to go. She had built a functional life on top of that story. She had worked 2 jobs and paid her own rent and put herself through school and constructed an entire architecture of self-sufficiency that was, she understood now, at least partially load-bearing on that version of events. If he didn't leave by choice, then the self-sufficiency was still real, but its foundation was different, and foundations mattered even when the structure above them appeared solid. She stopped thinking about it. Not because it wasn't important, but because it was too important for the inside of a moving car. 40 minutes from a road where someone she had never met was being held by a man who had spent 4 years pretending to be an ally. Damien ended his last call and turned in his seat. 6 people are meeting us at the Morrow Creek Junction, he said. Petra is coordinating from the port property. We go in with 8 total. He looked at her directly. You stay in the vehicle. No. Sienna, I heard what Marco said on that video. Without me, the accounts are inaccessible, which means Voss needs me functional and alive, which means I am the one person in this operation with a guaranteed safety margin. She held his gaze. Put me where that's useful. He looked at her for a long moment with an expression that moved through several things in sequence. Resistance, calculation, something that was not quite admiration but occupied adjacent territory. You stay behind the line, he said. You don't move unless I tell you. If it goes wrong, you run and you don't look back. Agreed. He turned back to the front. She looked at the window again. They met the 6 at a dirt pull-off near a water tower 2 miles before the junction. 3 vehicles, men and 1 woman she didn't recognize, the specific efficient silence of people who were not new to this. Damien got out and spoke to them in a low voice for 4 minutes. She watched through the windshield. There was a quality to how they received information from him. Not deference exactly, more alignment. The orientation of people who had decided to trust a particular center of gravity and organize themselves accordingly. He came back. Reed had a weapon now, holstered at his hip. She had known, intellectually, that this was the category of operation they were conducting. Seeing the physical reality of it produced a response in her chest that she identified and breathed through. Property at the end of the road is a converted farm building, Damien said. Single access road, which is a problem and also the only approach. There are 2 structures, a main building and a storage outbuilding. Thermal imaging from the drone Petra ran 20 minutes ago shows 6 heat signatures in the main building, 2 in the outbuilding. He paused. One of the signatures in the outbuilding is significantly weaker than the other, restricted movement, Marco. The weaker signature was Marco. Voss, she said, not confirmed on site yet. He may be in the main building or he may be managing remotely. His jaw was tight. We go in on the assumption he's present. Reed started the car. The last 2 miles were the longest. Morrow Creek Road was unpaved for the final half-mile, the surface rough enough that the SUV moved with a lurching deliberateness that Sienna's hip registered as a sustained complaint. The tree line was close on both sides. Scrub oak mostly, low and dense, providing cover from the road but also from the fields beyond. The light was late afternoon, the sky doing the specific thing it does in the last hour before dusk, where the shadows grow long and the depth of everything increases. Reed killed the headlights a quarter-mile out. They stopped at a tree-line break where the access road curved and the main structure became visible at 200 yards. Low, broad, the weathered brown of old agricultural buildings repurposed badly. Lights in the windows. A vehicle parked near the entrance. The outbuilding was to the left, set back from the main structure, 50 yards of open ground between them. Damien got out. She got out. He looked at her once, checking, and she held his gaze and he turned and moved toward the tree line, and she followed. The 6 people from the junction were already deploying around the perimeter in a pattern she couldn't fully track from the ground. She caught movement in the tree line to the right, a figure crossing low through the field to the south. Damien moved through the trees with a directness that suggested he had studied this layout on something more than a drone feed, as though the shape of the terrain was already mapped in some spatial memory he maintained for situations exactly like this one. She stayed close. Her breath came through her nose in the deliberate controlled rhythm she had been practicing for 20 minutes. Her wrist was wrapped tight in the brace, and she had made the decision to stop registering it. They stopped at the edge of the tree line, 30 yards from the outbuilding. The open ground between the trees and the structure was the problem. 30 yards of nothing. Dead grass, frozen mud, a rusted piece of farm equipment at an angle against the outbuilding's exterior wall. No cover. Whoever was inside would have sight lines across all of it. She watched Damien calculate it. She could see the calculation happening, his eyes moving, measuring, his breathing steady and deliberate. Then the main building's front door opened. Both of them went absolutely still. A man came out, lit a cigarette, stood near the vehicle with his back partially to them, looking toward the road. Damien made a gesture to his left, small and precise. She didn't know what it signaled, but someone in the tree line received it, because 30 seconds later there was a sound from the far side of the main building. Not loud, something dropping, something mundane, and the man with the cigarette turned toward it and moved around the side of the building to look. Damien went. He crossed the 30 yards at a run that was low and fast, and covered the distance before she had fully processed he was moving. He reached the outbuilding wall and pressed against it and held. He looked back at her. He made a different gesture. Come. She ran, 30 yards of dead grass and frozen mud, and the particular breathless commitment of a body that has decided before the mind has finished deciding. She hit the wall beside him, and the impact was harder than intended, and her hip connected with the rusted metal edge of the farm equipment, and she absorbed it without making a sound through sheer will. He glanced at her. She nodded once. He moved along the wall to the outbuilding door. The door was secured with a padlock that was newer than the building, heavy-gauge, quality hardware, which confirmed this was a space that someone had actually prepared for use. He produced a tool she didn't examine too closely and worked the lock in approximately 40 seconds, and she stood at his shoulder with her back to the wall, watching the gap between the two structures, and the man with the cigarette had not reappeared yet. The lock came open. Inside the outbuilding, the air was cold and smelled like oil and old wood and something metallic that she diagnosed automatically as dried blood before she could decide not to. Marco was against the far wall. He was seated on the floor, wrists secured behind him to a structural post, his head down. He was wearing what had probably been a good jacket 5 days ago. His face, when he raised it toward the light from the open door, was not good. The specific geometry of someone who had sustained systematic damage over multiple sessions, one eye swollen nearly shut, a split through his lower lip that had dried badly, the unhealthy pallor of someone who had not eaten or drunk enough in too many days. But his one open eye was alert. It found Damien and stayed there. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Then Marco said, in a voice that was rough and damaged but absolutely present, "Took you long enough." Damien crossed the space in 4 steps and crouched in front of him and put his hand on the side of Marco's face in a gesture that was so briefly and completely unguarded that Sienna looked away from it to give it the privacy it deserved. "Can you walk?" Damien said.
Yeah, a pause. Probably. The restraints. Left pocket. Damien found the tool he needed and worked the zip ties while Sienna stood at the doorway watching the gap between the buildings and listening for the man with the cigarette. The shadows were lengthening fast. Someone in the main building had turned on additional lights. She could see the windows brightening. "Voss is inside," Marco said, his voice clearer now that he was standing, though he was putting his weight primarily on his right side. "He's been here since this morning. He had a call 2 hours ago that made him angry. I could hear him through the wall." "We found the drive," Damien said. Marco looked at him. "Greaves. Greaves told us where you were. Voss sent a shooter to the office. Is he alive, possibly?"
Marco absorbed this. He looked at Sienna for the first time. His one open eye moved over the butterfly strip on her eyebrow, the brace on her wrist, the bruise along her jaw. Something moved in his expression that was a specific kind of 24-year-old's guilt. The weight of having put something in motion and then being unable to control the radius of its damage. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have come to you directly. I thought if I built the whole case first."
"Later," she said, not unkindly. "We need to move." He almost smiled with the wrong side of his face. "Yeah, okay." The plan, she understood from Damien's posture and the way he was looking at the main building through the cracked door, had shifted the moment Marco confirmed Voss was inside. They had come to extract Marco, but Voss being physically present changed the mathematics. "You're not just leaving," she said. Damien didn't answer.
"Damien, get Marco to the vehicle," he said. Reed is at the tree line. Go straight across and don't stop. And you? I have an arrangement to end. She looked at him. At the quality of absolute decision in his face, which was different from control and different from anger. It was the face of a man who had done the calculation and reached a conclusion he would not be argued out of. She wanted to argue anyway. She recognized this impulse, and she recognized that it was not her place, and more practically, she recognized that it would consume time they didn't have. Don't die, she said. He looked at her with an expression that moved through something briefly before it was contained. Take care of my brother. She got Marco's arm over her shoulders, and they went out the door. The 30 yards back to the tree line was different, with Marco's weight distributed across her and the damaged hip taking the compensated load and the night coming in faster than she had anticipated. She kept her eyes on the tree line where Reed was visible as a dark shape that resolved into a person as they got closer. 10 yards. 5. She heard the main building door open behind them. She did not look back. Reed caught Marco's other arm, and they moved into the trees, and she turned. The main building's door was open and light was spilling out, and she could see the silhouette of a man in the doorway. Broad, silver-templed, wearing a coat that cost more than 3 months of her diner wages. He was looking toward the outbuilding. He was looking at the open door. She watched his posture change as the calculation registered. Then 2 of Damien's people stepped out of the tree line on the south side of the property, and the man, Voss, turned toward them and his hand moved to his jacket. The next 4 minutes were the loudest of her life. She stayed at the tree line with Reed and Marco, and she watched it in fragmented impressions. Muzzle flash from the south tree line, the vehicle near the main building taking impacts that starred the windshield, a figure she didn't recognize running from the main building's side door and going down in the frozen grass 15 yards out. She could feel the concussive pressure of each report in her chest cavity, the specific physical fact of it. Marco was breathing hard beside her. He was upright, but it cost him. He okay, she said to Reed. Working on it, Reed said, which she took to mean he didn't know. Then it went quiet. The specific quality of silence after gunfire is different from regular silence. It has a ringing edge and a held quality, like the world is waiting to find out what happens next. She watched the main building. 60 seconds. 90. Damien came out the front door. He was upright, moving at a controlled pace, not running, which told her several things. His jacket was damaged at the left shoulder. She could see it from 30 yards, the material disrupted in a way that she categorized immediately and efficiently. Grazed or through and through, she couldn't tell from distance. But he was bearing weight on both sides, and his pace was even. He crossed the open ground to the tree line and arrived at her position and looked at Marco. All right, he said. It wasn't a question. All right, Marco confirmed, in a voice that contained significant evidence to the contrary, but also a specific stubbornness that she recognized as familial. Damien looked at her. Her eyes went to his shoulder. Through and through, he said. You need pressure on it. I know. Now, not in 10 minutes. He held her gaze for a beat. Then he sat down against the nearest tree without argument, which told her the shoulder was worse than he was performing it to be. She was already pulling the hem of the borrowed sweater out from under her jacket. That's going to ruin it, Reed said. Noted, she said, and tore a section of fabric with both hands. Her wrist objected violently. She ignored it. She folded the fabric into a compress and put it against the exit wound first, which was the larger concern, and pressed with her palm and told Damien to reach his right hand up to hold it, and he did, his face doing a careful, controlled nothing while she worked around to the entry and packed that too. Voss, she said while she worked. Secured. A pause that told her secured was the word he had chosen deliberately. His people are either down or gone. The ones who are gone won't be organizing anything tonight. He's alive. Yes, because you need him to answer questions. Among other reasons. She tied the compress off and sat back on her heels and looked at his face. He was pale under the olive tone, the kind of pale that was blood loss making early introductions. He would need a real doctor in under an hour. My father, she said. His eyes held hers. Voss knows where he is. He will tell us. She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at the main building, where 2 of Damien's people were visible at the entrance, and she thought about a man named Thomas Hartwell,
who had built a lock with her blood as the key and spent 11 years in hiding, believing his daughter had never answered. She stood. Her hip was a sustained scream that she put somewhere small and locked.
"Then let's go ask him," she said. Reed made a sound that might have been surprise. Marco, held upright against the tree beside his brother, looked at her with his one functional eye and said nothing. But the look said something. The specific look of someone recalibrating their estimate of a person they had watched from across a diner for 3 weeks and thought they understood. Damien put his right hand on the tree and stood. She was already walking toward the main building, and the light spilling from its open door and the man inside it who had spent 4 years dismantling everything from the inside. And she walked with the particular deliberate stride of someone who has passed through enough fear that the fear is still present but no longer in charge. And behind her she could hear Damien's footsteps on the frozen. Raymond Voss was sitting in a wooden chair in the center of the main room when Sienna walked through the door. He had not been placed there. He was sitting because his left knee had given out during the confrontation outside, and 2 of Damien's people had located him trying to reach a vehicle in the back of the property. And he had walked back inside under his own power because the alternative was being carried, and Voss was the kind of man who would absorb considerable pain before accepting that particular indignity. His coat was gone. His shirt was torn at the collar. There was blood from a cut above his ear that had run down the side of his face and dried in a dark track along his jaw. He still looked like the man in the photograph. The silver temples. The groomed authority of someone who had spent decades in rooms where power was the primary currency. But the performance layer was gone now, stripped by the specific circumstance of sitting in a chair in a cold farm building with nowhere to go. And what was underneath it was harder and older and considerably less composed. He looked at Sienna when she came in. She looked back. Damien came in behind her, his right hand pressed against his left shoulder, and stood to her left. Reed was at the door. The 2 people who had brought Voss back inside were positioned along the far wall. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Voss looked at Damien and said, "You should have taken the money." "What money?" Damien said. "The settlement I offered you 18 months ago, through Greaves. 2 million, clean, in exchange for the waterfront contracts." He said it without apparent irony, the flat professional tone of a man reviewing a business negotiation that had gone sideways. "You turned it down. If you'd taken it, none of this would have been necessary." Damien looked at him with an expression that was beyond anger. Anger had a heat to it. What Damien was carrying right now was cold and very old, the kind of feeling that has been processed through enough sleepless hours that it no longer requires temperature. "My brother," he said, "is alive, as I intended." "As you intended." "I needed leverage. I used what was available." Voss shifted his weight in the chair, a careful movement that accommodated the damaged knee. "I did not authorize permanent harm to Marco. I want that on record." "There is no record," Damien said. "There is only this room." Voss absorbed this. He looked at Sienna again. "You want to know about your father," he said. She had been standing very still since she walked in. She was aware of it, the specific quality of stillness that is not calm, but its functional cousin, the thing you arrive at when you have burned through all the available agitation and what remains is the requirement to simply be present. "Yes," she said. "Thomas is in Carver County," Voss said, "a property outside the township of Mill Haven. He's been there for 9 years under the name David Crane. He lives alone. He has no contact with anyone from his previous life." A pause. "By choice, initially, then by my arrangement." "By your arrangement," she repeated. Greaves managed the logistics, housing, documentation, a financial stipend that kept him comfortable and kept him quiet. He held her gaze. "He knew the stipend came from me. He accepted it because the alternative was resuming a life in which I would have located and killed him eventually. And Thomas Hartwell, for all his principles, has a functional survival instinct." She thought about that, about her father in a township called Millhaven under a name that wasn't his, receiving money from the man who had tried to kill him, accepting the arrangement because the arithmetic of survival demanded it. She thought about what that kind of compromise did to a person over 9 years, what it cost, what you became on the other side of it. "He tried to reach me," she said. "Several times in those first 3 years, yes." Greaves intercepted the attempts. Voss said it without apology or affect. as straightforward as a man reviewing operational details. It was necessary. Contact with you created exposure. Exposure created risk. He thought I didn't answer. She heard her own voice, which was level and quiet and contained on the outside, none of what was happening on the inside. For 9 years, he thought I didn't answer. Voss said nothing. What did he think? She said. When the letters didn't come back, when there was nothing, what did you tell Greaves to say to him? A long pause. That you had been told he was alive and had chosen not to respond, Voss said. That you had moved on. The room was very quiet. Sienna turned away from Voss and looked at the far wall for a moment. There was nothing on the wall. Old wood, a rusted hook where something had once hung, a water stain in the shape of nothing in particular. She looked at it and breathed and did the thing she had been doing for the last 24 hours, which was locate the thing that was too large and put it somewhere small and locked and continue functioning. She turned back. The account access, she said, the biometric architecture my father built. You need me to authenticate it. I need your cooperation, yes. And if I don't cooperate? Voss looked at her. For the first time since she had walked in, something in his expression shifted, a slight recalibration, an adjustment. He was reading her, she understood, the same way she was reading him, the same way everyone in this room was reading everyone else. I no longer have the leverage to compel you, he said. My people are gone or secured. You're standing here under Moretti's protection. The strategic reality has changed. He paused. I'm being practical. You're always practical, she said. That's the problem. He didn't answer. She looked at him for a long moment. At the silver temples and the dried blood and the careful, persistent authority of a man who had managed people and information and fear for so many years that it had become structural. The load-bearing architecture of his personality. She thought about what it would cost to maintain that for decades. What you had to stop feeling in order to sustain it. She thought about her father in Mill Haven accepting money from this man every month because the alternative was worse, and she thought about what that particular compromise felt like from the inside, and she felt something that surprised her by its presence. Not quite pity, but something in the same county as it, the specific recognition of a human being who had been diminished by their own choices over a long time and carried the result in their bearing. She stepped back from it. She did not let it soften anything. The accounts, she said to Damien. My people have the financial documentation Marco compiled, Damien said. Combined with the records Greaves maintained and whatever is on the drive, we have enough to give to the Federal Financial Crimes Unit anonymously. The accounts will be frozen. The network collapses without the asset base. He paused. Voss doesn't need your authentication. He never did. The biometric lock your father built was on the access architecture Voss was using. It was a fail-safe Thomas built in, without Voss's knowledge, so that Voss could never liquidate the accounts unilaterally. Your father made sure of that. Sienna looked at him. Voss needed me to break my father's lock, she said slowly, not to access the accounts himself, to remove the obstacle. Yes, she turned back to Voss. My father outsmarted you. Something moved in Voss's face, very briefly. For 11 years, he said, and in the flatness of the admission there was, buried deep, something that was almost respect. The grudging acknowledgement of a man who had been outmaneuvered by someone he had consistently underestimated. Damien moved then, slow, deliberate, favoring the shoulder, and crouched in front of Voss's chair. He was not a man who crouched in front of people as a rule. The choice of it was specific. The names, he said quietly. Every name in your organization, every contact, every arrangement, every account outside the ones we already have. You give them to me, and you leave this city, and you don't come back. Voss looked at him. And if I don't, then I spend whatever time is necessary making sure you don't have the option of leaving. The silence held for a long time. Voss looked at his own hands, at the dried blood on his collar, at some internal inventory of what remained and what it was worth. Get me something to write on, he said. It took 2 hours. Sienna sat outside on the steps of the main building while it happened inside, in the cold air that smelled like dead grass and distance, and she watched the sky go fully dark and the stars emerge with the specific brilliance they had out here away from the city's light pollution, and she breathed in and out and held her wrist against her chest and did not think about anything in particular with the exhausted, hollow-feeling focus of someone whose system has finally processed the last available unit of adrenaline and is now running on something older and simpler. Reed brought her a bottle of water at some point. She drank it. Marco came and sat beside her on the steps after about 40 minutes. He moved carefully. His ribs, she suspected, in addition to everything visible. He sat with his elbows on his knees and his one good eye forward, and they were quiet together for a while in the way of people who have been through the same event from different angles and don't yet have the language to compare notes. "I should have come to you first," he said eventually. Not to her. The statement was general, addressed to the air, to the fact of having made the wrong call. "Why didn't you?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. "Because I wanted to be the one who solved it." He said it with the specific flat honesty of someone past the point of useful self-flattery. Damien is always the one who handles things. I wanted to bring him a finished answer, not a question. She looked at the side of his damaged face. How'd that work out? He made the careful, not quite smile with the functional side of his mouth. Suboptimally. Yeah. Another quiet stretch. "He's been trying to reach you," Marco said. "Your father, not just in the first 3 years. He tried again 2 years ago. A different method, through a third party who wasn't connected to Greaves. It got intercepted anyway because Voss had a broader net than any of us realized." He paused. "The key he sent you 3 weeks ago. That was the first attempt he'd made in a long time. He found a route Greaves didn't know about, someone new, not connected to anything." A pause. "He took a significant risk to send it." She looked at the stars. "He didn't know if I'd use it," she said. "No. He sent it anyway." "Yes." She thought about that, about the specific quality of that kind of risk, not the physical kind, not the kind she had been navigating for the past 24 hours, but the older and more sustained kind, the kind that involves extending something toward a person who might not extend anything back, after 9 years of silence that you have been told was their choice. Her father had believed for 9 years that she had received his letters and chosen not to respond. And he had still sent the key. That was either the most stubborn thing she had ever heard or the most faithful, and she suspected it was both. And she suspected it was also the thing that had kept him alive in Millhaven for 9 years, maintaining the logic of it against the accumulated weight of all the evidence that suggested she didn't want to be found. She pressed her lips together and looked at the sky and blinked twice, and that was all she allowed herself right now. Damien came out at midnight. He sat beside her on the steps, on her right side, and she looked at his shoulder, and the compress she had packed was darker than before, and she said, "We need to get you to the doctor in the next 30 minutes. And he said, "I know." And neither of them moved immediately. "It's done," he said. "Voss?" "On his way out. He knows what happens if he comes back." He looked at the dark tree line. "The documentation goes to the federal unit tomorrow morning. By the time their lawyers are done arguing about jurisdiction, the accounts will be frozen, and the network will be too busy protecting itself to care about you or your father." She nodded. "Greaves survived the surgery," he said. "Petra got the update an hour ago. He'll cooperate with the federal process in exchange for a reduced arrangement. His testimony combined with the documentation makes the case." "And your 2 years of business with him?" "Exposed," he said, without inflection. "There will be complications. I'll manage them." A pause. "I've managed worse." She believed that. "Millhaven," she said. "Carver County. I'll have an address for you by morning." He turned his head to look at her. The moonlight was enough to see by. His face was tired in a way that went deeper than the physical, the specific tiredness of someone who has spent years at a certain altitude of vigilance and has just discovered that the ground they were standing on had a crack running through it the whole time. "I'll send 2 people with you just until—" "I'll go alone," she said. He looked at her. "I know you want to send people," she said. "I understand why, but this is not something I'm going to do with an escort." She held his gaze. "I need you to understand that." He was quiet for a moment. The compress on his shoulder needed attention. His color was not good. "I understand it," he said. She looked at him, at the jaw that had healed slightly wrong and the dark eyes that were, she had decided sometime in the last 24 hours, the most honest part of his face. Not because he performed honesty there, but because the control didn't quite reach them. and what lived in them was too old and too specific to be manufactured. "You brought me into this," she said. "Yes. You could have managed me differently, kept me at the edge of it. I would have been safer." "Probably," he said, "but you didn't." "No." He looked at the tree line. "You would have found your way to the center of it regardless. People do, when it's their story." A pause. "I'd rather be next to you when it happened than have you in it alone." She held that for a moment. It was not a declaration. It was not an offering. It was a man describing a decision he had made and standing behind it, which was its own kind of thing. The kind that didn't require anything additional said around it to be clear. "Get in the car," she said. "You need a doctor." He stood, slowly, carefully. She stood beside him and did not offer her hand because he wouldn't take it, and they both knew it, but she walked close enough that if he needed it, the option was there, and that was enough. They drove back to the city in the dark. The doctor came to the port property at 1 in the morning. Sienna sat in the main room while the procedure happened in the back room with the door closed. And she drank the coffee. Someone put in front of her and ate half of a sandwich she didn't remember requesting and sat with the specific vacancy of a mind that has processed its maximum daily load and is refusing additional inputs. Marco fell asleep in a chair across the room. She watched him sleep for a while. The damaged face, slack and young in unconsciousness, the too nice jacket folded over him like a blanket. 24 years old and stubborn enough to have walked himself directly into the center of something that should have broken him, and still present on the other side of it. That counted for something. She didn't know him, but it counted. Reed brought her the address at 2:15 in the morning, a printed sheet, a property address in Millhaven, Carver County. A name, David Crane. She folded it and put it in her jacket pocket. She thought about calling ahead, decided against it. Some conversations needed to happen in person, in a room, looking at each other's faces. A phone call would give too many opportunities for preparation and practice distance, and she had already decided she was done with practice distance, at least for this. Damien came out of the back room at 2:45. The shoulder was dressed properly now, the arm in a light sling. He looked pale and considerably less steady than his posture was working to suggest, but his eyes were clear and the set of his jaw had the quality of someone who has absorbed the worst of something and recalibrated around it. He sat across from her. They looked at each other for a moment in the particular way of two people who have moved through something together and are now on the other side of it in a configuration neither of them had anticipated. "Your operation," she said. "The 2 years of Greaves. When the federal complications arrive. I'll handle it." "I know you'll handle it. I'm asking whether you'll be all right." He looked at her. The question seemed to catch him slightly off guard. Not the asking of it, but the specific quality of it, the plainness of it. "Probably," he said. "That's not a great answer." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." She looked at her hands, at the brace on her wrist, and the bruised knuckles, and the short, unpolished nails of a person who worked with their hands in actual ways. She thought about her apartment on Orchard Street, the broken front door lock, the blue mug on the dish rack that Reed had wrapped in a dish towel. She thought about one more semester of nursing school and the clinical rotations that would begin in February. She thought about how the shape of her life looked identical from the outside to how it had looked 48 hours ago and was, from the inside, so thoroughly different that she was not sure she had the vocabulary yet to describe the difference. "I need to go back," she said. "After Millhaven, my own apartment, my own life. I know," he said. "I'm not disappearing. I'm just, I know, Sienna." She looked at him. He held her gaze steadily, not with resignation, not with an attempt to hold on to something, but with the quiet recognition of a man who understood the difference between what he wanted and what was right, and had made his peace with that distinction sometime in the last several hours, probably while the doctor was working on his shoulder. "The address," he said, "in Millhaven. My people confirmed he's there. As of this morning, he was following his normal routine." A pause. "He gets up early. He tends a kitchen garden. He has a dog." She looked at him. "A dog," she said. "A brown one. Medium-sized. Appears to follow him everywhere." She didn't know why that detail landed the way it did. There was something in the specific domesticity of it. The kitchen garden, the brown dog, the early morning. that made the 11 years real in a different way than any of the rest of it had. It gave her father texture. It made him a person who had been living a life, specific and daily and ongoing, while she had been doing the same, separately, with an ocean of false information between them. She felt the thing she had been locking away all night push against its door, and she let it push, and she held her own face together through it and breathed in through her nose. "Okay," she said. She left at first light. Reed drove her to her apartment first and waited while she went in. The building's front door was still broken. Her apartment was exactly as she had left it. The dishes in the rack, the clinical binders on the shelf, the bare surfaces of a person who had never accumulated enough to make a space feel permanent. It looked smaller than it had 2 days ago, or possibly she had just changed her sense of scale. She showered and changed and packed a bag with the efficiency of someone who had once lived from a single duffel and still knew how to do it. She looked around the apartment once before she left, at the blue mug on the dish rack that Reed had brought back wrapped in a dish towel, at the corkboard above the desk where she had pinned her clinical rotation schedule and a photograph of her mother and 2 notes to herself she no longer needed. She took the photograph of her mother off the corkboard. She put it in the bag. She left. The drive to Carver County took 2 hours and 40 minutes. She sat in the passenger seat and watched the landscape change, city to suburb, to the long rural stretches where the fields were winter brown, and the sky was enormous and pale blue with the particular clarity of early December. Reed drove without conversation, which she appreciated. She held the folded address in her lap and didn't unfold it again because she already had it memorized. Millhaven was small, the kind of town that had a diner and a hardware store and a post office in the same block and a water tower visible from every direction. She had never been here. It had no previous associations in her memory. It was simply the place where her father had been living while she was elsewhere. The 2 halves of a family arranged by circumstance on opposite sides of a geography that had been made to seem like choice. The property was outside the township proper, a gravel driveway off a county road, a farmhouse set back among mature trees, a kitchen garden visible along the south side, dormant for winter, the raised beds mulched with straw. She got out of the car. Reed said nothing. She walked up the driveway alone. The brown dog found her first. It came around the side of the house at a trot, medium-sized as advertised, tail moving, the friendly investigative energy of a dog that has lived a quiet life and finds most things interesting rather than threatening. She let it smell her hand. She heard the side door. She straightened up. He was older. Of course he was. 11 years older, 53 now. The hair that had been brown in every photograph she had reconstructed from memory, now heavily silver. He was wearing work clothes, canvas and denim, a jacket against the cold. He had a coffee cup in his hand. He had the specific, slightly bent posture of someone who had spent years doing manual work outside. The good kind of posture, the kind earned rather than affected. He stopped when he saw her. The coffee cup lowered to his side very slowly. She stood at the end of the driveway and looked at him, and he stood at the side of the house and looked at her, and neither of them moved for a moment. That had a quality of duration she couldn't measure normally. Time doing the thing it did when the present moment was too weighted to move through at the standard rate. She watched his face. It went through things. She watched each of them, and she knew some of them because she had seen them in her own mirror at various points. And that was, she thought, the specific thing about looking at a parent, the recognition of your own interior weather in another person's face, the understanding that you are assembled from something that came before you. He said her name, just that. One word, in a voice that was rough at the edges, in the specific way of something that had not been used for this particular purpose in a very long time. And she heard in it 11 years and the letters that hadn't come back, and a brown dog and a kitchen garden, and a life that had been reduced to its most minimal components and maintained with the stubborn, daily faithfulness of someone who had not stopped believing that it was worth maintaining. She walked up the driveway. She didn't run. She was 26 years old and had walked through a hospital, a gun battle, a farm building, and 200 miles of accumulated truth in the last 2 days, and she walked the last 30 feet of this particular distance the same way she had walked all of it, upright, forward, at her own pace. She stopped in front of him. He was taller than she remembered. Or she was taller than the 14-year-old he remembered. Both, probably. "I got your key," she said. His throat moved. "I didn't know what it was," she said. "I thought it was someone's lost mail. It It sat on my counter for 3 weeks. She paused. I'm sorry it took me that long. He shook his head. A small motion. That's not, the motion said, completing itself without words. They told you I didn't answer, she said. Yes. His voice was barely there. I didn't know. I didn't know any of it until 2 days ago. He closed his eyes for a moment. She watched his face do what it was doing, and she let it do it, and she stood in front of him in the cold December air, with the brown dog sitting next to her feet, and she waited. When he opened his eyes, they were wet, and he didn't attempt to address that, which was the right decision. You look like your mother, he said. I know, she said. I have a photograph. I carry it. Something in his face broke open briefly and then reformed around the break, the way bone heals. She reached into her jacket pocket and produced the photograph. Her mother, mid-30s, laughing at something off camera with the specific unguarded brightness of someone who doesn't know they're being photographed. She held it out. He took it. He held it in both hands, the coffee cup set down somewhere she didn't track. And he looked at it for a long moment. She watched him. She thought about what Greaves had said. Your father is a good man. She thought about all the ways a person could be good and still make choices that cause damage, and all the ways damage could be caused by circumstances rather than choices, and all the ways those two things were not always clearly distinguishable from the outside. She thought about Damien Moretti, who was also not a good man in any uncomplicated sense, and who had walked into a hospital at midnight and told her the truth and stood beside her through what came after. She thought about Marco in his too nice jacket. She thought about Victor Greaves in his chair with blood on his collar, and the 12 names he had given Damien in exchange for a road out of the city, and what that kind of accounting cost a person, and whether the cost registered or whether the ability to register it had been spent a long time ago. She thought about what it meant to survive something, not to win it, not to emerge from it unchanged and triumphant, but to simply still be standing at the end of it, oriented forward, in possession of the things that mattered. The photograph, the blue mug, the borrowed sweater, the name of a township in Carver County. Her father looked up from the photograph. Come inside, he said. It's cold. She picked up his coffee cup from where he had set it on the garden bed's edge and held it out to him, and he took it. And they walked toward the side door together, and the brown dog preceded them both through it without ceremony, as dogs do, as though the entire arrangement was the most natural thing in the world, as though there had never been any question about how this particular morning was going to go. Inside, the kitchen was warm. It smelled like coffee and wood smoke and the specific ordinary smell of a house that a person has lived in alone for a long time and kept clean because keeping it clean was one of the ways you maintained the argument that your life was still worth the effort. She sat at the kitchen table. He poured her a cup of coffee without asking and set it in front of her and sat across from her, and they looked at each other across the table in the quiet, practical light of morning. There was everything to say. There was no hurry. She wrapped both hands around the mug, her own hands, bruised and braced and present, and felt the warmth of it move through her palms, and she thought about Damien in the port property, watching daylight come in through industrial windows with a dressed shoulder and a set of names that would keep him busy for the foreseeable future, and she thought about Marco sleeping in a chair with his too nice jacket over him, and she thought about her mother in the photograph that her father was now holding on the table beside his coffee cup, like he had been waiting 11 years for permission to hold it again. Outside, the winter light moved across the kitchen garden in the slow, indifferent way of light that has no agenda. She drank her coffee. She began to talk, and her father leaned forward across the table, both hands wrapped around his own mug, and listened with the focused, hungry attention of a man receiving something he had been waiting a very long time to hear. Not news, not information, not the facts of what had happened or what had been survived. Just the sound of his daughter's voice. Just that. The world, and everything broken in it, could wait another hour.